Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Purposeful Learning Festival on Mind, Health, and Wellness. This is O'Donnell Learn's Education and Culture Conference, and we're thrilled to kick off this first event with our Linda Dela Cruz. So my name is Matt Gurney, and I'm Senior Vice President of Strategy and Product Innovation for O'Donnell Learn. The team has put together a great month of programming for you, focusing on the mental health and wellness of the entire learning community, and we're excited that you can join us. Today's session is Culturally Inclusive Mental Health for Diverse Populations, presented in partnership with the JED Foundation. We're honored to be partnering with JED for this festival. They're the nation's leading organization dedicated to young adult mental health. Not only do they equip teens and young adults with the skills and knowledge to help themselves and each other while encouraging community awareness, understanding, and action for young adult mental health, JED strengthens schools by working directly with high schools, colleges, and universities representing millions of students to put systems, programs, and policies in place to create a culture of caring that protects student mental health, builds life skills, and makes it more likely that struggling students will seek help and be recognized, connected to care, and supported. Leading today's session is Erlinda Dela Cruz, who serves as a JED campus advisor. Erlinda's experiences include training development, student advocacy, and facilitations or workshops around identity, cultural humility and competency, and mental health in people of color. She has held positions in residence life and multicultural affairs at St. Peter's University and Columbia Mailman School of Public Health. Erlinda grew up in both Houston, Texas, and Phoenix, Arizona. She received a BA in sociology with a minor in film studies and an MA in mental health counseling from Boston College. Before I hand the webinar over to Erlinda, here are some quick housekeeping items. This is going to be a very interactive session, and it's important that we hear from you. You'll notice the chat button on the bottom of the screen. Some of you may have already done this, but for those of you who haven't, please introduce yourselves to the group and use it throughout the session to share comments with the entire group. Put any questions you have in that space and we'll get back to them. Also note, there's an option to turn on live transcription in the Zoom control bar. We will be sharing session resources, including the recording and slides, in our Purposeful Learning Community Slack channel, where we invite you to continue the conversation with fellow attendees. Now over to you, Erlinda.
I'm going to share my screen. Can everyone see my screen okay? Great, appreciate the thumbs up. One second. Okay, hello everyone. Thanks for attending this presentation today. I greatly appreciate it. As Matt said, my name is Erlinda Dela Cruz and I'm a campus advisor for the JED Foundation. I liaise with colleges and universities to help improve their systems to create positive mental health among their students. But I would like to do a sort of check-in today. So if you could use the chat, how do you feel in terms of the weather today? Do you feel stormy inside, bright and sunny inside, cloudy? Please put your responses in the chat. I would say I feel a little like cloudy in thinking of like how mellow and calm I feel like it is. So that's how I feel today. Thanks for all the check-ins. I appreciate all the sunny people, all the cloudy people, those who have upcoming storms or feel a little stormy inside. Please take a chance to use some self-care. If you need breaks throughout, please do. If you need to chat with folks, please do. But I want to start off with a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge the land that each of us live, learn, and thrive. are the traditional lands, are the traditional, ancestral, and unceded homelands of Indigenous and tribal nations. JED's office is located on the homelands of the Munsee Lenape people. We acknowledge the genocide and systems of oppression that have dispossessed Indigenous people of their lands, and we honor and respect the diverse and beautiful people still connected to this land. If you know what land you reside on, please put it in the chat. If not, I'm putting a really great resource where you can find out. Thanks, Carl, for knowing already. So to really look at the presentation and just the overview, here is the general flow. We'll go through JED's mission and work, set some groundwork with definitions and rationale, and then we'll go over ways you can help. There will be a breakout group at the end. As we go through the presentation, if you have a question, feel free to use the raise hand button option at the bottom of your screen, put it in the chat. My co-facilitators or logistics folks will help direct the questions, but feel free to ask questions throughout. But by the end of the presentation, you should be able to describe the mental health landscape for Black, Indigenous, or BIPOC youth, and LGBTQ plus youth, reflect on how youth identity is linked to a sense of belonging and mental health, and apply principles of culturally responsive support for mental health with your work with students. So in terms of shared expectations, we've got some heavy stats coming to set some ground rules so we can be ready. Please prioritize self-care and take the space you need to. So in order to make this a safe space and a productive space, we want to share the following ground rules. Please use I statements, share from the heart, listen from the heart. Folks make mistakes and that is fine. We are on a learning journey. So please just be open to mistakes, but also to learning. Is there any shared expectations that folks would like to add besides the ones already on the screen? Cool. So JED is a nonprofit that protects emotional health and prevents suicide for our nation's teens and young adults, just like Matt has mentioned. We educate and equip youth, families, and communities to know when and how to support others who are in distress or struggling with a mental health issue through campaigns and workshops just like this one. We complete this mission through some of our JED programs. I just want to direct your attention to Set to Go, which is our free resource guidance for students transitioning from high school to college. So if your school has a lot of first gen students, this could be really helpful. If your school has a lot of students who just, the transition is difficult for them in general, this is also a good resource. And then Seize the Awkward is our peer-to-peer resource guide helping students talk to each other about mental health. There's a before the conversation, during the conversation, and after the conversation script for students to use. There's also some free commercials and videos that are able for you all to use. So to start off today, I think it's on. What brings you to today's discussion? Oops, if you can. Oops. What brings you to today's discussion? If you can use polleverywhere.com, J Foundation 502, or text J Foundation 502 to 22333. And we can figure out why you all are here today. One second as I make the poll live. Cool. It seems my poll won't turn on today. Technical difficulties. If you could put your responses in the chat, then that would be perfect. Great. It seems like a lot of folks are here to either better support their students in the classroom or better support their students outside the classroom, which is very much what we're here to learn today. Okay, so before we start, I just want to go over some key terms to make sure that we are all on the same page, since I'll be using these terms often and throughout the presentation. BIPOC stands for Black, Indigenous, and People of Color. People of color is typically used as an umbrella term for people who are not white, especially as they face racism and discrimination in a white dominant culture. Black and Indigenous are highlighted in this acronym to kind of bring awareness to the issues they are currently facing. And then LGBTQ stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, and queer or questioning people. It serves as an umbrella term used to describe people who identify within these communities. Okay, so I'm sure you all have initiatives around diversity, equity, and inclusion at your respective institutions. At JED, we really are trying to use an equity framework for mental health just because we believe it's important as well. When you prepare for the most marginalized communities, you better support mental health for all. Has anyone seen this photo before? You can type in a quick yes in the chat. Great, so we have a few people who have seen it and a few people who haven't. Equality is providing everyone with the same exact resources. Equity is giving everyone the resources that fits for them. So in the top image, everyone received the same bicycle, regardless of if it was right for them. In the bottom image, everyone received a bike tailored to them so that they can be successful in achieving the shared goal. At JED, we place a large emphasis on equitable implementation because we know that students, like I said, from marginalized groups are at a higher risk for mental health challenges, bullying, and suicide. In education, equity is not as simple as the photo above, but when you are designing curriculum and activities with the most marginalized students in mind, you end up putting supports in place for all students. Why do you think we are talking about this? And who are the students in your system for who the bike was not designed? If you can answer those questions quickly in the chat. I will also put the question in the chat. Thanks, Barbara. So ESL students, first-time students who have limited opportunities, deaf or hard of hearing students, students with non-apparent disabilities. Great. So let's talk about the need and rationale. 1 out of every 5 young people has a mental health condition right now. yet 46% are not getting treatment. 76% turn to a friend first when they're in distress, yet their friends are uncertain how to help. Life skills and self-care habits are proven protective factors, yet teens are graduating high school emotionally unprepared for their next steps. Among 21 college students at some point this year have struggled with all these different things during 2020. I just want to point out a few things. 2 out of 3 felt overwhelming anxiety, and 1 out of 2 felt too depressed to function. 1 out of 3 witnessed race-based discrimination, and 1 out of 3 had serious thoughts of suicide. On top of the pandemic, there have been many other things that have happened this past year and a half that have also affected our students' education. Increase in bias and hate incidents, challenges to institutional leadership, student protests and demands, racial trauma from negative media, exposure to violence, remote learning and increased isolation, increased xenophobia as a result of messaging about COVID-19. Really, the goal is we just want all students to experience belonging and resilience as they experience challenges. This means we need to also provide support and address the systems and structures that cause negative experiences due to racism, homophobia, xenophobia, etc. So to specifically look at the data, nationally, depression and anxiety has increased since 2019, but it has spiked among Black Americans after George Floyd's death. Though many colleges have focused on improving student mental health and hiring more diverse counselors, some students of color are still not getting the help they need. Students of color are more likely than our white students to feel overwhelmed, but less likely to seek mental health treatment. So according to a 2020 report from the Steve Fund, students of color have been disproportionately affected by 2020's coronavirus pandemic, economic crisis, and racial reckoning. So even when colleges make changes and start diversity and inclusion efforts, racism and microaggressions can still take a toll on our students. 48% of LGBTQ youth reported engaging in self-harm in the past 12 months, including over 60% of transgender and non-binary youth. 40% of LGBTQ respondents seriously considered attempting suicide in the past 12 months, with more than half of transgender and non-binary youth having seriously considered suicide. Excuse me. Increased suicide risk among Latinx LGBTQ youth is due to race stress-related experiences of stigma, discrimination, and victimization, as opposed to being LGBTQ in and of itself. The higher risk of attempting suicide among Latinx LGBTQ youth compared to non-Latinx LGBTQ youth can be explained by greater worries about themselves or family being detained or deported due to immigration policies. These are also mental health treatment rates by racial identity. As you can see, the Asian group received mental health treatment at a slower rate than any other group. Part of this could be due to finding a therapist that is like them. About only 5% of psychologists are Asian, 5% are Hispanic, and 4% are Black. I know someone mentioned ESL as a population that isn't always thought about. This could also be an issue in seeking out treatment and finding someone that speaks your language, because, right, like, when you learn English, talking about your own mental health isn't necessarily, like, those terms aren't necessarily taught. You already know how to describe it in your home language. So finding someone that understands your home language could also be a challenge for folks. These are some other barriers to think about as well. Can anyone think of other barriers that I haven't already talked about? Feel free to put it in the chat. Cool. So if students can bring, yes, finding affordable resources is definitely a barrier. So if students can bring their full identities to school, they believe they are valued members of an inclusive community. They can trust that they can be respected and more likely to be positively impacted by protective factors to emotional health promotion and suicide prevention. Cool. My polls are just not turning on today. If you could also then answer this question in the chat, that would be great. Just what are some strategies you have used to help students feel like they belong? How have you created a sense of belonging already on your campus? So I see shared agreements, listening, language and tone of syllabus, a welcome letter before class begins. Providing opportunities for flexibility in course activities, deadlines, assignments, format, office hours, being available. You're right, Laura, like a lot of belonging and social connectedness has stopped because of COVID and physical distancing. Markeisha says acknowledging their feelings, thoughtful about language and welcoming a variety of perspective and experiences to be shared. Sharing your own experiences as appropriate. Great. So we've talked about what's currently happening with your students. Some of you have already suggested different things that you have already done, but we can talk about more of what we can do and tangibly things that we can do. So engaging someone who is in need. Explain it, why you're concerned and be specific. Provide examples of what you've observed. So you've been missing lots of classes, you've been dressing differently, you've come late a lot, you seem more irritated, things that you've actually observed. Show compassion, show why you care. I'm worried about you, I'm concerned, things like that. Use a lot of I statements. Listen. You truly don't have to solve the problem, but having someone to listen to you can go a long way. Truly, sometimes students just need a soundboard, need a listening ear, need someone to actively listen to them when probably in many places in their lives, they don't have a lot of spots or places where someone is willing to listen and actively listen. But also know your own limits and boundaries, know how much you're able to take on and when you may need help from others. Remember, connection is key. So maybe it comes to a point where you are concerned and you need to refer them out to counseling or need to refer them out to maybe a financial literacy person on your campus or academic advising or financial aid, whatever makes sense for the student. Know when you need to refer, know what resources are available on your campus. But outside of checking in with your student, here are some other ways to support them. So reflect on how your identity shows up. Like mentioned before, your organizations, your schools are already doing its own work around this, but it's important to constantly reflect on how we are showing up with and for students as a result of our identity. Listen to and partner with BIPOC and LGBTQ students. Partnering with your students and showing that you care can make a huge difference. Even showing up to an event or helping advertise their event can help. And even reaching out outside of awareness months, outside of Black History Month, outside of Pride, right? Like our students still hold these identities outside of these awareness months. So finding out or figuring out ways where you all can collaborate with them is great. And also even just helping advertise can show a lot of care and a lot of concern. So culturally responsive approaches is build authentic relationships with them. They are the on-ramp to engagement and learning, really building trust with your student so that they don't feel like a number, they don't feel like someone in the crowd. Acknowledge diverse students' stress response from everyday microaggressions and help calm the brain. I feel like more and more folks ask me, what do you do if you've microaggressed a student or someone? Genuinely apologize. Understanding the impact versus the intent can truly make a huge difference. As I've said before, this is all a learning journey. We are truly all learning. So genuinely apologize and have that conversation with that student of what was said, the impact, what are ways you can do it better. So many times students are microaggressed and are told, oh, don't be too sensitive, or they didn't mean it, so you shouldn't take offense to it. And that just causes more stress and more pain on a student because they're constantly told these things aren't that big of a deal, right? But when you're constantly told these things, it can take a toll on your person. So recognizing the impact it has made on the student can go a long way. And then create a community of learners by building on students' values of collaboration and connection. If it creates intellectual safety, it reduces stereotype threat. So if for those of you who are in the classroom, don't just necessarily ask them what they think when it is related to their community. Open it up to the group. Make sure you build that trust with that student. Can anyone else think of examples on how to do these? Lena says, tell personal stories, create safe physical and emotional space, listen and affirm where they are. Great. Does anyone else have other ideas? One-on-one meetings, moments of connection, ask questions. For those of you who are in student affairs, are there ways that you've collaborated with student groups to do culturally responsive programming? Right. Listen to what interests them. It's better if you can get the class to respond to shared interests and concerns. Right. Great, Eileen. Yes. Apologize, take responsibility, build the relationship. Great, Samantha. Love that idea. Okay, so I know I've thrown a lot at you and truly quickly. We're going to put you in breakout rooms to really talk about these questions. I'll also put them in the chat so you have access to them when you go into breakout rooms. Stephanie, I know I said 10 minutes, but I think we have time for a 15-minute breakout room. So if we can change it to 15 minutes, that would be great. Hello, everyone. Didn't realize I was muted. How was that? I hope it wasn't too awkward. Is there anyone who would like to share on what their group talked about, whether you all learned new techniques or habits from others, or if there's any shared barriers or challenges that different folks have? I know that was a lot in one question.
Well, I think one thing from my small group, unfortunately, one person got booted off. I don't know if she had to leave, but I'm a nursing instructor, and I'm the person that talked about English as a second language. And so, you know, they kind of have a lot of difficulties because all the students are trying to learn the medical terminology, and then they're trying to translate that into their language. Maybe they don't have any words for that in their language. But one of the tips that Brett talked about was visual, having visuals, even maybe, you know, as we teach, and maybe we need to put some visuals in our tests to help them understand the words. And I thought that was a great tip for us.
Love that. I think that definitely is a great tip. Is there anyone else who would like to share what they talked about? Okay, well, I'll talk for our group. We talked about sometimes students feel like they're a burden when they're coming to ask you for help. And even when you ask them, like, is there anything wrong? Can I help you? They're still like, well, I'm fine. So we talked about how sometimes students don't really understand what resources are out there until they need them, right? Until there's an emergency. So asking like targeted questions about specific, like, is it like, how's your financial aid? Do you have access to internet? Things like that. So it's not such a big open question. Someone also suggested even doing meetups in different offices. So that way they can both learn about who's in the office, what their services are doing, but also see what that office like activities they're doing as well. And even just knowing what location these services are is also important. This is my final slide, technically. Does there any questions, thoughts, concerns that anyone has? If you could put it in the chat, I guess. Or any questions that folks came with that weren't answered?
I have a question, Erlinda. This is Brett Christie.
Mhm.
Love the ready to go resource. I really could have used that in my day, but I managed. But I'm thinking, what do you have as far as a ready to go resource for faculty to be able to effectively apply some of these concepts to better connect with and support students?
Great question. Some of the resources that I already mentioned before are there are also faculty things there as well. I think one thing that faculty can do right now is one, to even put like a mental health statement, whether it be, there are different types. There are some where it's like, if you are in crisis or need concern, directly in their syllabus, like, please call this number. Here's how to seek resources, things like that. Some faculty members have started their classes with a check-in or a mindfulness break or a meditation break, whatever makes sense for your class, no matter the field. Those are different things professors have done. And then if you look on our website, we also, they're COVID related, but I think they're still applicable, of thinking about how faculty and staff members can help support their students during this time. Because, right, technically the pandemic's still going on. And so these are ways that students can still get support.
Thank you.
I think Samantha Mahoney has a question.
Instructors here, what can we do to better support you in supporting your students? Before I answer, does anyone else have a thought? Especially for those who are on a campus.
I'll share. I would just say consider the time and space that we're in, and when creating a lesson plan, leave space for when life happens. If we're all watching the news or abreast to what's happening in our world, so just be mindful of how that may be impacting your students, depending on what type of groups they may be a part of, and just leave space in your lesson plan throughout the semester for life to happen, and let your students know that you understand that life will happen. You may have a standard that you want them to meet, but also that you're flexible and willing to adjust if necessary. So
I love that, Markeisha. I think also that is most relevant to the time now, because a lot of schools are coming back on campus, and students may or may not have had a space to truly process and talk about what has happened this past year and a half, because a lot has happened and a lot has affected a lot of students. Like mentioned before, anecdotally, we've seen substance misuse go up. We've seen PTSD symptoms go up. Grief is a huge issue. So, well, huge theme. So relating current events to your curriculum could be really beneficial for your students. Nancy says, our historically Black college, we have a long-standing ethic of care, yet it is often a challenge to get instructors on board with the need to invest in classroom community, student mental health, etc. Does anyone have thoughts also before I respond? So Nancy, your case is different because you're in an HBCU. You really have to think about what essentially reusing or adjusting your language, right? So because in the Black community, stigma is high. Like, you don't talk about mental health, you don't talk about being queer, you don't talk about struggling because struggling is normalized. So really thinking about how do you redefine how to support the struggle and redefine that struggling is not normal, that this isn't something you should do every day. So really thinking about how do you redefine it for your faculty and staff so that they can then redefine it for their students. So it's kind of just like a reframe.
Thank you. We also, our student population is primarily African American, but our faculty demographics are shifting, and we're approaching 50% international faculty because we're a STEM school, and then roughly 50% African American. So we are starting to shift our focus to the international folks to help them understand our context a little bit better. And in general, giving faculty just some tools, that they can easily use without feeling like they have to take any time away from their content to build community or something like that. So we found, little small spoonfuls of tips we've made more progress that way than really trying to win folks over to the idea that, the way, a lot of cultural responsive pedagogy is kind of just good teaching, But anyway, I appreciate your idea. I think that's good, and I'm going to ponder that some.
I'll take one more question or comment because we are at time.
Can someone just tell me about the next webinars?
Cool. I'll kick it off to you, Matt.
All right. Thanks for Linda. This was a really informative session, and thanks for kicking off this month. So Barbara, to answer your question, the next webinar is next Wednesday, September 15th, also at 12 noon Eastern time. And it will be focused on growth and healing through trauma-informed education with Dr. Mays Ahmad. So I believe that you will also be receiving more detailed information on that webinar. But again, that will be September 15th at 12 noon Eastern time. And so definitely check your email for our Purposeful Learning Fest 21 newsletter that will be coming out a couple times a week, as well as the Slack channel where you can continue the dialogue from this conversation and attempt to build, community amongst yourselves as we continue to explore more topics related to mental health and wellness in the learning experience over the next several weeks. Does anyone else have any other questions about the festival itself that we can answer?
Where
Okay,
can
great.
they access the recordings, Matt?
Oh, that's a great question, Brett. So the recordings, as well as all of the resources, will be posted within the Purposeful Learning Community Slack channel. So you can always find them there. And then they will also be, I believe, distributed via email. But the Slack channel will be always up to date and a single source for everything that you might need to access. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful day. And I'm really looking forward to sharing the next month with all of you, chatting about this really, really important topic.